Hi there, I'm Bombalina. Before my scholarship interview, the one I worked years for, my sister stole my passport. And my family? They all pretended it was just a mix-up. But it wasn't the first time something like this happened. They'd sabotaged my science project in middle school, ruined my prom dress, lied, smiled, and called it love. What kind of family does that and still expects your silence? I had a secret backup plan, but what I didn't expect was what came after. Want to know what happens when the quiet one finally speaks? Dinner was halfway done when I said it out loud. I made it to the final round for the International Policy Fellowship. They're flying me to Chicago next week for the interview. The words felt steady when they left my mouth. I'd rehearsed them enough, but the moment they hit the table, the air thickened like soup left too long on the stove. Dad didn't even look up from the newspaper, just nodded vaguely and muttered, "That's nice, honey," like I'd said something about the weather. Mom paused, fork midair, then smiled. Not the proud kind, more like the one she used when I brought up things too big for someone like me. "Bambi, sweetie, don't set yourself up for disappointment again, okay?" Carlene leaned back in her chair, arms folded. Her eyes sparkled, not with joy. "You? Representing America abroad?" she snorted. "You still forget the laundry in the washer. Better pray the embassy doesn't find your wet socks." The table erupted in laughter. Even Uncle Roy, who barely knew what year it was, chuckled from the end seat. I didn't laugh. I just sat there, gripping my napkin beneath the table until the corner tore off in my palm. No one noticed. That's how it had always been. I was the quiet one. The one they thought was a little strange for not watching reality TV, for reading policy papers at the kitchen counter, for quitting a decent payroll job to chase a dream. But this was different. This wasn't just a lack of support. It was mockery. Full on, round the table, go back to your lane mockery. Carlene raised her glass. "To dreams that die in airport security." And they all clinked their glasses together, smiling like it was some harmless joke. After the dishes were cleared, I did what I always did. I helped wash, dried the plates, loaded the dishwasher while everyone else returned to their shows. But inside something cracked. The next morning, I had a tutoring shift at the public library, part of a small volunteer program for adults studying for their GEDs. It was the only place I felt useful, respected. Mr. Holcomb was one of the retired teachers who stopped by sometimes. He'd been a mentor when I was in high school, a man of few words, but sharp as ever. That day as I was packing up, he pulled me aside near the stacks. "I heard about the fellowship," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched. Then he hesitated, glanced over his shoulder. "You asked me to write a recommendation letter back in January. I sent it in through their system, as you requested." I nodded. "I got confirmation they received something." He frowned. "A week later I got another email, said it was from you, asking me to update the name on the letter, to Carlene's." I blinked. "I thought it was strange," he continued, "but the email looked real. Had your old signature and all." I didn't say a word, just nodded slowly and whispered, "Thank you for telling me." He gave my arm a gentle squeeze and walked away. I didn't cry. Not then. Not even when I got home and found Carlene lounging in the living room, flipping through her phone like she hadn't just stolen a piece of my future. Instead, I went upstairs, closed my door, sat on the edge of my old twin bed, surrounded by forgotten high school medals and participation certificates no one had framed. Then I stood and stared at myself in the mirror. Really stared. They never saw me. Not really. Not when I stayed late at work to fund my community college. Not when I won the essay competition in sophomore year and paid my own way to DC. Not when I cooked, cleaned, filled in the blanks where my sister fell short. All they saw was what I made easier for them. And now, I wasn't even worth a seat at the table. Only the punchline. I knelt down and pulled out the shoebox from under my bed. It was labeled Plan B in red marker. Inside, a second copy of my birth certificate, a scan of my ID, a backup passport application already submitted, a prepaid debit card. I wasn't stupid. I'd learned years ago that in this family, you had to have an exit strategy. Just as I was closing the box, I heard Mom calling from downstairs. Bambi, you okay up there? I cleared my throat. Fine. Your sister says you're upset. Of course she did. I lay back against the pillow, arms crossed behind my head. The ceiling fan spun slowly, and the hum of the house settled into the silence I knew too well. I wasn't planning to confront anyone. Not yet. Some storms require silence before the strike. That night, just as I was pulling my blanket over me, I found something tucked beneath my pillow. A folded note. The handwriting looked familiar, soft curves like Mom's, but it wasn't. It was left under my pillow like a bedtime blessing. The paper was carefully folded into thirds. I unfolded it slowly, the edges crisp, like it had just been printed or, worse, rehearsed. The ink was a smooth blue, the curves neat and rounded like my mother's. But something about the spacing of the letters, the exaggerated curls in the G, gave it away. Sometimes God closes doors for a reason, it read. You don't have to force everyone open. Love, Mom. Except it wasn't her. I'd seen her real handwriting for years. Grocery lists stuck to the fridge, reminders on napkins, birthday cards. This one felt like a performance. Too measured, too perfect. I pulled out the last birthday card she gave me, tucked in the bottom drawer, under some old receipts. The difference was clear. This note was an imitation, and a sloppy one at that. Someone wanted me to feel comforted, quieted, disarmed. It didn't take a genius to guess who. 3 days passed. Sunday rolled around like it always did. Church in the morning, lunch at home right after. Routine, routine, routine. That's how they liked it. Familiarity as a shield against accountability. The house smelled like roast and gravy when we walked in. I helped Mom set the table, while Carlene flipped through hymns on her phone, humming softly like a woman baptized in virtue. Lunch began with grace. Carlene was chosen to lead it, of course she was, and her voice floated across the room with sugary elegance. We pray for humility, for guidance, for Bambolina's restless heart, that it may find peace in God's timing. Peace in God's timing, a convenient cloak for manipulation. They all echoed Amen. I didn't. As the plates passed and conversation shifted to the service, Dad chuckled. That pastor sure knows how to wake people up. I nearly dropped my wallet when he raised his voice. Carlene grinned. You weren't the only one. They laughed. Small, harmless talk. Then I tried. I emailed the fellowship committee yesterday. They confirmed my slot in the interview schedule, next Wednesday. Silence. Mom glanced at me, then back to her plate. You're always so stressed about these things. Maybe try trusting a little more. Dad muttered. Let's not make this another one of your dinner speeches, Bambi. We're just trying to eat. Carlene tilted her head. We love you, Bambi. You know that. But you really do tend to spiral. Remember that summer you swore someone at the testing center had lost your scores on purpose? She smiled like she was comforting me. Everyone chuckled softly. I kept my fork down. It wasn't just the laughter. It was the choreography of it all, like a scene rehearsed a dozen times until everyone had their cue. You always overthink. You stress too much. Maybe you imagined it. A gentle piling on, enough to make anyone doubt their own footing. I didn't argue. I smiled politely, took a sip of water, excused myself before dessert. Back upstairs, I went straight to my drawer and laid the fake note beside the birthday card. I studied them again. The loops, the spacing, the way the lowercase e tilted just slightly in Mom's real writing, but stood upright in the note. I tucked them both into a folder. I wasn't sure what I'd do with them. Yet. I spent the next couple of hours pacing my room, then cleaning out files on my laptop, anything to keep my hands moving. When I went downstairs to grab tea, Carlene was already in the kitchen, pouring hers. She turned slightly when she heard me, her tone sweet as maple syrup. Mom says you didn't eat dessert. Everything okay? Just a headache, I replied, reaching past her for the honey. She nodded slowly, not breaking eye contact. Hope it's not stress. You know how you get. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked past her, toward the family computer in the corner of the room. It had been running slower lately. Certain documents didn't open like they used to. My flash drive had gone missing from the drawer last week. Small things. But now, they were starting to connect. She moved past me, cup in hand, humming the same hymn from lunch. As I stirred my tea, I glanced back at the login screen on the desktop. Somebody had logged in 2 nights ago under my profile. I hadn't. So who did? I stood there for a moment longer, cup warm in my hand, steam rising. No confrontation, not yet. But I saw it all now. The patterns, the fingerprints. They were trying to convince me I was imagining it, and for a long time I had. Not anymore. I didn't sleep much after that. The light from my desk lamp cast long shadows across the carpet, and I stayed at the edge of my bed, staring at the folder with the forged note tucked safely inside. My tea had gone cold hours ago, untouched on the nightstand. I could still feel its warmth in my hands, like a memory that hadn't cooled yet. I sat down, opened the drawer where I kept old cards, and compared the signature again. No doubt it was fake. And it wasn't just the handwriting. It was the tone. That kind of rehearsed God's plan voice I'd heard 1,000 times when someone wanted to soften a blow they were too cowardly to deliver honestly. The drawer stuck for a second as I pulled it open all the way. Behind the cards and papers, I found the worn shoebox I hadn't opened in years, the one I labeled 7th grade solar system. I ran my hand over the top, hesitating, but my fingers found the lid anyway. Inside were scattered pieces of foam balls, toothpicks, little labels I'd written with a shaky Sharpie when I was 12. Pluto's name was still smudged, probably from when I'd cried holding it. I built that model over 4 weekends, stayed up on school nights painting, stringing the orbits, making Saturn's rings from fishing line. The night before the science fair, I came downstairs to check on it, and the whole thing was soaked in glue. Not knocked over, not broken by accident, just drowned. I remember Mom rushing in saying, "Oh no, did that shelf collapse?" She didn't look at me. Didn't notice the open glue bottle tipped over neatly on the counter? Or maybe she did and said nothing. I'd seen Carleen in the garage earlier that evening. She said she was grabbing laundry. I didn't ask questions. I didn't scream. I just stayed up all night trying to fix what was left. The next morning, I stood in front of my project at the fair like it hadn't been a total disaster, pretending I was just clumsy with adhesives. That was the first time I knew I couldn't rely on my family for protection. But it wasn't the last. I got up, walked across the room, and turned off the light. The room darkened, but the thoughts didn't. They just changed shape. Memories I hadn't invited started rolling in. Junior year, prom season. I was 17. I'd saved for that dress for months. Tutoring after school, skipping every iced coffee, eating crackers for lunch more days than I'd admit. It was a deep burgundy velvet, fitted just right, with lace around the sleeves. I kept it in a garment bag in the back of my closet. The night before prom, I unzipped the bag and nearly dropped to the floor. The bottom hem was streaked with bleach. Not spilled, poured, even, white lines across the fabric like someone had measured it. I stood frozen for a full minute. I don't know why I looked around the room like the culprit would be standing there with the bottle. I showed Mom. She winced. "Oh, honey, the laundry probably got mixed up. You left it too close to the washer." Funny, because Carleen's dress was in the same load, not a drop on hers. In fact, it looked freshly steamed. I didn't say anything. That night I put on a backup dress, not even mine, just something from a friend's closet. I showed up late and told everyone I decided not to go all out. A lie I didn't even realize I'd rehearsed until years later. I walked back to my desk, pulled open the second drawer, and found my old journal. Most pages were childish rambling, but one entry caught my eye. "I think maybe I make things harder for them. I don't mean to." That line hit me harder than I expected. A kid trying to shrink herself down so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. Trying to believe it was her fault for taking up too much space. I tore that page out and tossed it in the trash. "No," I whispered. "You were surviving." I opened my tablet, created a new document, and typed the header. Timeline, sabotage. I listed everything I remembered. Dates, incidents, patterns. Not because I planned to show anyone, not yet, but because I needed to stop gaslighting myself. This wasn't paranoia. This was a pattern. And I was done pretending it wasn't real. I didn't get up with an alarm. My body woke me before the sun reached the slats of the blinds. It was that kind of morning, sharp in the lungs, dry in the mouth, the kind that drags you upright before the house even creaks to life. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the heater kick on. The silence in the hallway was too still, too careful, like the house was trying not to wake itself up. I grabbed my file folder, the one with my scholarship packet, and flipped through it one more time. Everything looked in order: application copies, printed emails, photocopies of IDs, all except for one thing. I needed to reprint my passport page for the packet I was assembling to bring to the interview in Chicago. The deadline was closing in, and I didn't want to risk grainy scans. I was planning to head to the print shop around 10. That meant retrieving the original from the home safe, just for a clean copy. No big deal. But even as I walked toward the home office, something in my chest itched. The safe was where Dad kept donation receipts, Carlene's tax forms, some birth certificates. We all knew the code. The same 6 digits since I was 13, 1992, Carlene's birth year. No one had changed it because, what's the point, it's just family. I turned the knob slowly, entered the code. The click sounded normal, familiar. I pulled the door open, and the folder was right there in the center, exactly where I'd left it. Same color, same clip. But when I opened it, my passport wasn't inside. Everything else was there. Forms from church, envelopes labeled 2022 giving records, even Dad's voter registration. Untouched. Pristine. Just not my passport. My stomach flipped. Not a drop, but a slow roll that settled into something cold. I went through the papers twice. Then again. Then I shook the folder upside down, like something would fall out and explain it. Nothing did. I stood there, hand gripping the edge of the safe door, the silence heavier than the steel itself. Only 3 of us knew the code. And I was damn sure I hadn't told anyone where I kept that folder. Still holding the empty folder, I walked out of the office, down the hallway, and into the kitchen. The clock above the sink read 8:03. Mom was still at her women's group. Dad would be at the store. Carlene's car was gone. The house was quiet. I reached for my phone and dialed the Department of State's passport office. I wasn't even sure what I'd say. Maybe just request a status update. The hold music was like a heartbeat in my ear. Steady, clinical, pretending not to mock me. Then a voice came on. "Thank you for holding. This is Anthony. How can I help?" I cleared my throat. "Hi, I need to check the status of a passport, mine. It's supposed to be current and active, but I think it might have been tampered with." I gave him my name, date of birth, last issuance year. A pause. "Miss Cloanne?" he said. "Actually, this passport was reported lost 2 weeks ago." I blinked at the stove. "Reported lost? By who?" "I'm afraid I can't give names," he said, "but the system notes it was reported by a female family member, notarized locally." I didn't respond. I could hear my own breath through the speaker. "Is it reversible?" "You'd need to reapply or use the backup application you submitted in March." I sat down. I never told anyone about that March reapplication. It was precautionary, an instinct maybe, like I knew I'd need a plan B and didn't trust anyone enough to say it out loud. The moment I hung up, I walked back to my room, locked the door, pulled up my backup email, the one I'd set up 6 months ago, separate from everything connected to the house Wi-Fi. There it was, a delivery confirmation. A replacement passport signed for 3 days ago, by someone named Nevia. I didn't even smile. I just exhaled. I opened the drawer under my bed, pulled out the smaller safe I kept hidden under a blanket of old sweaters. Keyed in the code. Inside, untouched and safe, was the backup envelope. They had tried to cut me off at the knees. They thought I'd panic, freeze. But I wasn't the same girl who showed up to prom pretending bleach was a laundry mistake. I picked up the envelope and stared at myself in the mirror. My face wasn't furious. It wasn't even afraid. It was calculating. Let them think they've won. Let them think I'm too quiet to make noise. They don't know what silence is until it becomes strategy. I tucked the backup passport into a padded envelope, sealed it, and slid it into the false bottom of my suitcase. Quiet steps, no panic, no second guessing, just deliberate motion. I'd already lost enough time pretending things would fix themselves. Downstairs, the voices reached me before the faces did. Carlene was laughing, soft, casual, like nothing in the world could be wrong. Mom's voice drifted in next, sweetened with faux concern. Dad's low hum of approval came last, the sound of someone avoiding eye contact with the truth. I descended the stairs one at a time, not slowly, but carefully. I didn't want to rush. I wanted them to see me coming. The living room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. Mom was perched on the edge of the couch. Carlene sprawled across the other end with her phone in hand. Dad sat in his recliner, eyes on a daily devotional, pretending to be absorbed by the same paragraph he'd read for years. I didn't sit. I stood across from them like I was about to give a presentation no one had asked for. Someone reported my passport as lost, to the federal database, officially. No reaction, no blinking, just stillness, like a painting. Anyone want to own that? Carlene didn't look up. That's paranoid. Why would we do that? Dad turned a page without reading it. Mom shifted slightly, eyes soft but detached. You're under a lot of stress, sweetheart. You've always been dramatic when deadlines approach. They all performed confusion with practiced ease, like it was muscle memory. I wasn't even angry in that moment, just numb. Carlene added, You remember freshman year? You thought the registrar lost your exam scores on purpose. Maybe this is like that. It was a deliberate flick of the wrist, meant to discredit without sounding cruel. They'd mastered that dance years ago. I didn't flinch. You all seem very committed to the idea that I'm unstable, I said. I'm just wondering what happens when I stop playing along. A beat of silence. Then Mom stood up and moved toward the kitchen. Let me make you some tea. I stepped into her path. Was it you? I asked. Or did you just sign what she handed you? Her eyes dropped for a second. Then she smiled, the kind of smile people offer at funerals. Sometimes God closes certain doors, she said softly, and we have to trust His will. I stared at her. And if this door was mine to walk through? Then He'll open another, she replied. You don't need this one. Your sister needs you here. She's had a hard year. It wasn't a denial, it was a reroute. Sabotage wrapped in faith. Carlene rolled her eyes. This is ridiculous, Bambi. You always make everything about you. Dad finally looked up just for a moment. Your mother's been up all night worrying. She already raised one star, Bombolina. Maybe that's enough for one family. It landed harder than any shout could have. I took a breath. Not deep, just enough to stay steady. So I was never supposed to shine. Got it. We gave you peace, Dad said, turning his gaze back to the page. You wanted noise. It was surgical, the way he said it. No emotion, just the verdict. I walked toward the doorway but stopped before leaving. I turned around. Calm. Steady. I have one shot at this, I said. If you interfere again, if any of you do, I won't be the one leaving. Mom's face froze. Carlene looked like she was ready to scoff again. I added, I won't shout, I won't fight. I'll just tell the truth. And when it lands, your little image of a perfect home won't survive it. Carlene snorted. What are you going to do, Bambi? Write a memoir? I didn't blink. No, I'll just let your lies echo without my silence to muffle them. Then I left the room. Not quickly, not dramatically. But with every step the ground underneath me felt more mine. That night, in the quiet of my room, my phone buzzed once. A message from Navia. Package secured. They never saw me. I sat on the edge of my bed, rereading Navia's message. My fingers brushed the outline of the sealed envelope hidden in the lining of my suitcase. Beneath the surface, my heart beat a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not doubt, but momentum. The house creaked as night set in, dinner dishes already done, the television humming softly in the living room where my parents sat glued to their routine. Carlene's voice echoed faintly from the hallway, probably bragging about her newest Instagram followers. No one knew what I had planned, and that was the point. Once the house quieted, I slipped into my closet, pushing aside a stack of off-season sweaters and kneeling on the wooden floorboards. My hands found the familiar loose slat, pried it open, and reached into the dark space below. The emergency backpack was still there. I pulled it out gently, like it might shatter if disturbed. Inside, every item was right where I'd packed it months ago. Backup passport, copies of recommendation letters, alternate ID, a prepaid phone with a brand new SIM, cash, and a printout of my scholarship itinerary. I checked the passport again. The seal was still intact. I let out a quiet breath. This wasn't a plan B anymore. This was the plan. My phone buzzed again, just once. Nevaeh was FaceTiming. I grabbed the prepaid and answered. Her face appeared in the dim light of her parked car, hair in a messy bun, voice low but urgent. They're watching your socials now. I saw Carlene trying to log into your old Gmail. She's using the family tablet. I told you to stop posting on your main. I haven't in days, I replied. Good, stay dark. You're too close. She leaned forward, flipping the camera to show footage from her building's front cam, time-stamped, clear. The package had been delivered hours earlier. No one followed her. No one even knew she'd driven out this way. They're slipping, B, she said. Desperate always makes people dumb. I'm past asking permission to exist, I told her. Nevaeh smiled. There's the girl I remember. You got this. She hung up before I could thank her. I sat still for a moment, the prepaid resting in my lap, my reflection flickering across the black screen. Then I reached for my tablet and opened the encrypted cloud folder I'd created last winter. Inside was the video. I hit play. Carlene, caught on camera, clear as daylight, in my room last Tuesday night. Rummaging through drawers like she had every right. Her hair was tied back, she looked calm, calculated. She wasn't even in a rush. The footage cut to her walking into the home office with something in hand. Timestamp, 9:12 p.m., exactly 48 hours before the passport was reported missing. I copied the video into a separate labeled drive. It was subtle, no dramatics. But as I watched her scroll through my files, pull open folders, snoop like it was second nature, I felt the last remnants of guilt dissolve from my spine. I wasn't paranoid. I was targeted, and I had proof. I closed the folder, slipped the USB into the side pocket of the backpack, and zipped everything tight. They thought silence meant surrender. They never realized silence could also be strategy sharpening its teeth. My fingers traced the edge of the bag. I wasn't just walking out with a plan. I was walking out with a record. The house was still quiet. I heard the front door lock click from the hallway, Mom's voice asking if Carlene had fed the dog, and Dad complaining about reruns. They had no idea what had already shifted, what I'd already reclaimed. I turned off the light, slipped beneath my blanket, and lay still. Tomorrow wouldn't be an escape, it would be a return to myself. I woke before the sun broke the horizon. My room was still wrapped in a soft hush, but my mind was already sprinting. I reached for the prepaid phone on my nightstand. 3 missed texts from Nevaeh. Nevaeh, you need to see this, it's spreading fast. I clicked the first link. There it was, Carlene's Instagram story, shining bright in bold white text over a filtered family photo from last year's 4th of July. So proud of my little sister for choosing rest over pressure. Mental health matters. Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to stop. The next frame showed an old picture of me, mid-laugh, captioned, "We support you, Bambi, always." I sat up slowly, my jaw tightening. The audacity. There were already dozens of comments underneath the post. People writing things like, "So brave of her to step back," or "Family first, always." Some even praised Carlene for supporting me through burnout. This wasn't support. This was a soft kill. I scrolled through Nevaeh's other messages, screenshots of Carlene replying to strangers, playing the role of the doting sister. One reply read, "It's been a hard few months for her. We're just grateful she's taking time to heal." I felt like I was watching someone sculpt a wax version of me, smiling, nodding, stepping aside, gracefully defeated. And all of it was a lie. 36 hours before my interview, and the narrative was already being rewritten. I threw off the blanket and opened my laptop. There was an email from the scholarship committee. Subject: Follow-up, Interview Withdrawal. I held my breath and opened it. Dear Bombolina, we've received confirmation that you've chosen to withdraw from the final interview scheduled in Atlanta. As we understand the decision came from your primary email account, we'd appreciate a quick confirmation. We're here if you need to talk. I blinked twice, checked the headers. The sender was a cloned version of my Gmail, off by one letter, identical at a glance. My fingers flew over the keys. I responded with urgency and precision, attaching a PDF of my travel confirmation, scanned copies of my backup passport, and a short, assertive note. That message was not sent by me. I'm attending the interview. Please see attached proof. And this? I linked the cloud folder. Inside, I placed the video footage of Carlene entering my room, the time-stamped activity logs, and the metadata Nevia had extracted overnight. Less than 2 minutes after I hit send, my phone rang. The coordinator. Bambolina? She asked, her tone unsure. Yes, I didn't send that email. Someone's trying to erase me. A pause, then her voice softened. We were confused. I'm glad you reached out. Just tell me this. Are you coming? I swallowed hard. Yes, and when I do, I'd like to speak to the panel. Directly. I could hear the weight in her silence. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was belief. Understood. We'll see you soon. I exhaled slowly as I hung up. Then I turned back to the screen, where Nevia had sent another message. Nevia. We pulled the metadata. That email came from the family laptop. Same IP as your house. Same timestamp you saw her in the video. I stared at the blinking cursor in our chat thread and typed back. They knew how to write my voice, but they forgot I had receipts. Nevia responded with a voice note this time. She's trying to win sympathy, but you've got truth. When this hits, you won't just survive it. You'll redefine the whole thing. I closed the laptop and reached for the small black notebook where I'd scribbled my outline for the interview. But instead of rereading it, I tore it out. I was done rehearsing their expectations. I opened a fresh page. This time I wrote down everything they didn't know I'd kept. Dates, details, duplicates. I wasn't going to post anything online, not yet. Let Carlene enjoy her show. Let the world applaud her made-up compassion. I didn't need to shout in a comment thread. I had a bigger stage. By the time the plane landed in Atlanta, the sun was already breaking over the skyline, washing the glass terminals in amber. I exited the terminal alone, no one waiting for me, and that felt right. I had left behind more than a town. A rideshare took me straight to the Regional Scholarship Center, an angular modern building with clean lines, glass walls, and sharp air conditioning. I stepped out in slacks and a blazer I had picked up secondhand but steamed that morning until it looked new. My backpack felt heavier than it should have, like it was carrying every version of me they'd tried to bury. At check-in, the receptionist gave me a once-over that lingered too long. I gave my name with a steady voice. As I waited near the candidate briefing room, a woman in a gray pantsuit approached. Miss Clune? Yes? She extended a hand. I'm Ferris. We've received some conflicting communications. Are you here to confirm or clarify? I smiled faintly. Both. She led me through a hallway into a smaller, quieter conference room. I took a seat, opened my laptop, and placed a single flash drive on the table. Before I answer anything, I said, I need you to see this. The room dimmed slightly as the screen lit up. I navigated to a folder labeled with my name. Inside, a PDF scan of my travel itinerary, replacement passport, and a statement with evidence logs. Then I opened the email forgery data, highlighted headers, falsified timestamps, and the server it was sent from. Miss Ferris glanced at the documentation, lips tightening. I also have this, I added, clicking a second file. A still frame appeared. Carlene's face caught mid-motion, captured by a camera Nevia had set near my bedroom hallway. Timestamp, the night my original passport vanished. But I wasn't done. This is audio, recorded at our church group's rehearsal space, I said. Legal in Missouri with single-party consent. Her eyes narrowed. Play it. Carlene's voice came through the speakers. Clear, cold. If she gets this scholarship, no one's going to care about me anymore. A pause. You know how people are. She gets out, I become the nobody sister. I'm not going to let that happen. I stopped the audio. Miss Ferris stared at the paused waveform. I didn't come here to win sympathy, I said. I came to make sure my silence didn't become complicity. She didn't say much then, just nodded, asked for the flash drive, and said she'd pass it to the final board. You're scheduled for 10:30, she said, her voice softer. We'll see you then. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I delivered my formal presentation, focused on my proposed community health policy initiative. My voice didn't shake. I didn't over-explain. I answered each question with clarity I'd fought hard for, and when it was over, I walked out without looking back. Hours later, I sat in a cafe 3 blocks from the center, nursing a lukewarm tea I hadn't touched. My phone buzzed nonstop. The scholarship's official page had posted a statement: "Integrity matters, courage matters. Candidates who speak truth will always have a seat at our table." Navaya texted, "It's everywhere now. Even people from your high school are reposting it." Some are shocked. Most aren't. Another message followed. A link to a thread where users were dissecting the audio and video evidence, expressing support, calling Carlene out without me ever saying her name. A stranger commented, "She didn't drag her sister, she just stopped covering for her." I reread that line twice. This wasn't about revenge. It was about release. I leaned back in the cafe chair, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Then my phone lit up again. Mom calling. I stared at the screen. No message, just her name. I let it ring until it stopped. She didn't leave a voicemail. A moment later, a text appeared. "Can you please take it down? This is hurting our family." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The sun had barely cleared the trees outside the dorm window when I opened my laptop. The acceptance form was already queued up on the screen, blinking cursor at the bottom where my signature would go. I didn't hesitate. Click, submit, done. My phone buzzed almost immediately after. Another message from Mom, short, sharp. "You could have handled this privately." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. There was no acknowledgement of what they did, no apology, only the same performative concern, this time not for my safety or future, but for their image. I didn't respond. I wasn't angry. I just wasn't available anymore. Later that morning, while walking back from grabbing coffee near the edge of campus, I played her voicemail, the one I ignored the night before. Her voice cracked, but not in remorse. "I don't understand why you'd do this. You humiliated us. Your sister is hurting." There it was. Still no mention of me, of what I had been through, of what they'd done. I deleted the voicemail and kept walking. Back in the room, I sat on the bed and pulled out my journal. My pen scratched across the page. They never saw me, just the disruption I caused by existing. 2 knocks at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. A student staffer handed me a letter. Inside, a neatly folded envelope from the program's lead committee. They were offering a permanent spot, not just as a fellow, but as an ambassador for public leadership. I was invited to speak at the closing ceremony next month. No conditions, no apologies needed, just recognition, trust, truth. I texted Navia. They made it official. She replied with a string of clapping hands, then followed up. "Told you, the truth holds." I smiled. That afternoon, I received an email from a nonprofit I'd never heard of, Youth Mental Health Coalition out of Oregon. They were organizing a panel for students with lived experiences in family systems that silenced them. They wanted me to speak. Another email, this time from a high school sophomore in Ohio. "I watched your interview. I've never seen someone say out loud what I've only whispered in my head. Thank you." And a tweet, going viral slowly. "Because of @ Bombalina Cloen, I reported my uncle for stealing my identity to claim my FAFSA." I stared at it for a long moment. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a mirror, and people were finally seeing themselves in it. That night, I set up my phone on a stand, sat in front of the window, and hit record. My voice was quiet, but certain. If you've ever been told you were too loud, too proud, too ambitious, too difficult, hear this. They weren't protecting you. They were protecting the silence that allowed them to stay comfortable while you stayed small. I paused, letting the quiet speak. You don't owe them your light. You owe it to yourself to stop hiding it. I saved the video. I didn't send it to my family. They weren't the audience anymore. As I closed the laptop and curled under the thin university blanket, I felt something I hadn't in years. Stillness that wasn't fear. Peace that wasn't conditional. I used to wonder what it would take for them to finally see me. I don't anymore. I see myself, and she's not going anywhere. Looking back, I used to think that keeping the peace meant staying quiet. That love looked like sacrifice, and family meant shrinking so someone else could shine. But now I understand. Peace that costs you your voice isn't peace at all. It's erasure. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't owe anyone your silence. Not your sister, not your parents, not a culture that teaches you to smile while you're slowly disappearing. Your truth matters, even if it shakes the room when you speak it. So if you're sitting in a place where your worth has been ignored or your ambition treated like betrayal, I want you to know, you are not alone. You never were. And it is not too late to reclaim your voice. Maybe you've gone your whole life putting everyone else first. But what if this chapter, right now, is the one where you finally choose you? Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt like your voice was drowned out by people who were supposed to love you? What would you say if no one could interrupt you? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments. Or just tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't connect with you, I respect that too. Let me know why and where you're tuning in. I read every word you send my way. And hey, if you'd like more stories that speak the quiet truths out loud, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of voices rising, together. You deserve to be heard. And I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, my name is Kimberly. My husband told me we were building something together. Said my parents' house would be the foundation of a future we'd own. I sold it. I signed the check. I even named the app. But the night they launched, I wasn't in the room. I wasn't on the slide. I wasn't in the story. Then they tried to pay me to disappear. They forged my signature, moved millions offshore, and crowned his mistress, the CFO I once called a friend. What kind of man erases the woman who helped build his empire? And what kind of woman lets him think he got away with it? I remember the way Alden looked at me that afternoon. Hopeful, persuasive, like he truly believed he was doing something noble. The papers were spread across the scratched coffee table, the same one we'd eaten microwave dinners on for years. Sunlight poured through the blinds, making the old oak floor glow golden. It should have been a comforting moment, but the weight of the decision ahead made the air feel thick. "This is it, Kim," he said, nudging the pen toward me with that boyish grin that used to melt my better judgment. "This is the leap. You and me, building something from nothing. Like Bezos in a garage. But we've got better Wi-Fi and actual chairs." I laughed, but it was thin, hollow. He had the charm, always did. That easy confidence that made strangers trust him within minutes. And me. I was the one who made sure the car was inspected, the taxes filed, the light bulbs changed. The one who kept things running in the background while he dreamed out loud. I looked down at the deed. My parents' names, still neatly printed at the top, and mine, soon to be signed at the bottom. The bungalow wasn't fancy, but it was full of memories. My dad sanding that porch rail every summer. My mom humming while watering her porch plants. That house was their love letter to us. And now, I was turning the page. My hand shook as I signed, but I smiled anyway. For him. We toasted that night with 2 cheap beers and leftover takeout. Alden paced the room with a whiteboard, sketching out big ideas while I sat on the floor, sorting through bills. He called it our founder's phase. I called it Wednesday. Weeks turned into months, and we moved into a tiny co-working space in East Austin. It smelled like burnt coffee and stale ambition. I brought in lunch most days, juggled vendor invoices, kept the fridge stocked with LaCroix. He'd walk potential investors through the room, pat me on the shoulder like a reliable dog. "This is Kim," he'd say. "She keeps everything running." Once, I asked why I wasn't on the team slide he presented. He wrapped an arm around me and whispered, "Because you're too valuable to be on paper. You watch my blind spots." I smiled then, but that night, I sat in the car 10 minutes before going inside, wondering if blind spots meant stay in the dark. A year passed. The app hit 10,000 users. We were hosting our first investor celebration at a sleek bar downtown. I wore a black dress I hadn't pulled out in years. He didn't notice. The room buzzed with startup energy. Guys in hoodies with 6-figure checks, women in power heels and VC badges. Alden took the mic and lifted his glass. To the dreamers, the coders, the believers who made this happen, and the team who backed me when no one else did. I waited. Just a beat. Maybe he'd look my way. Maybe he'd say my name. He didn't. Instead, he introduced Seraphine Vale, the new marketing hire from Stanford. Slim, confident, with the kind of voice that sounded like it always knew what it wanted. "We're lucky to have her," he said. "She sees the bigger picture." She shook my hand later, her grip soft, eyes sharp. "You're Kimberly, right? I've heard you're like the glue." The glue, not the architect, not the co-founder, the glue. I laughed politely, ordered a second drink, and drifted toward the back corner, where no one was looking. In a room full of people I helped bring together, I felt like an unpaid ghost at my own birthday party. Back home, I opened my laptop, scrolled through social media out of habit. There it was, Alden's LinkedIn post. Building the future of tech with bold vision, his face front and center. No mention of me, no trace of we. I stared at the phrase under his photo. Visionaries are lone wolves. My thumb hovered over the screen. I whispered to myself, then what does that make me? That night, as I cleaned wine glasses no one thanked me for, I heard my sister's voice echo from years ago. "You're gonna lose yourself in that man." The next morning, I washed the same wine glasses I'd dried the night before, this time not out of habit, but necessity. Isolde was hosting Labor Day brunch at her place, and I knew showing up empty-handed would be its own kind of betrayal. She'd texted me the address twice, even though it hadn't changed in years, like a subtle reminder that it was her house now, not the one we grew up in. That wasn't an accident. When I arrived, the backyard was already filled with the scent of grilled corn and sunscreen. Lawn chairs circled the patio like judgmental relatives, and the sweet tea was sweating in a pitcher next to a bowl of store-bought potato salad Isolde would claim was homemade. "Look who finally decided to show," she called out, arms wide but eyes sharp. I smiled, not because I meant it, but because I knew how this worked. In our family, you didn't make scenes. You made casseroles and swallowed things whole. As I made my way through the crowd, I caught bits of conversation, mostly about Alden. His name floated above the hedges, carried by voices that didn't quite know how to talk to me without him as the headline. "He's really something, huh? That app of his is everywhere now. I read he's speaking at some big tech event next month." I sat quietly near the edge of the patio, my plate balanced on my lap, the chicken dry enough to scrape the roof of my mouth. Across from me, Isolde raised her glass. "To success," she said, eyes gleaming. "And to riding the tech train while it's still hot. Just don't end up in the caboose, Kim." Laughter scattered like loose gravel. I bit down on my fork harder than I should have, and nodded, forcing a laugh that sounded like it belonged to someone else. "I was full before I sat down," I muttered, pushing the chicken around. Later that afternoon, after the laughter had dulled and the sun dipped low, I found myself on the porch swing with my niece Ellie. She was 8, all elbows and endless questions, and I loved her more than I loved most adults in that yard. She held her tablet up to my face. "Look, Aunt Kim, this is from Uncle Alden's launch party. It has like 1,000,000 views." I squinted at the screen. The clip showed Alden standing in front of a huge LED screen, lights blinking like slot machines, voice smooth and polished. Seraphine stood next to him, smiling like she owned the world. Ellie tilted her head. "Why aren't you in the video? Didn't you make the app too?" I paused. "I helped behind the scenes," I said softly. She chewed on her lip, thinking. "But Mommy said people who don't show up don't count." I felt that sentence land in my chest like a thud. I smiled anyway, brushing a hair from her face as if her innocence somehow made it easier to take. The swing creaked under our weight. A breeze picked up, spinning the plastic windmill planted in Isolde's flower bed. I focused on it, let its steady rhythm distract me. That evening, I drove home in silence. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't hum to myself like I usually did. The house felt colder than usual, or maybe I was just noticing it now. I sat at the kitchen table, the overhead light buzzing faintly. I reached for the drawer where I kept old paperwork. The things I couldn't throw away, but didn't want to look at either. Among takeout menus and expired coupons was the original pitch deck Alden and I made for ClearPath. Slides printed out, scribbled on, coffee-stained. My name used to be listed under Operations Plus Strategy. Now the space was blank. Alden's handwriting, neat, careful, had crossed it out months ago. He never mentioned it. I never asked. I stared at that blank line for a long time. They didn't erase me. I handed them the eraser. I stared at the crossed-out line on the pitch deck long enough for the kitchen clock to tick past midnight. My name, once neatly typed beneath a role I lived and breathed, was now a smudged shadow. That's what hit hardest. Not that Alden had done it, but that I'd noticed and said nothing when I still had a voice. 2 weeks later, I found myself at a launch event I had planned down to the napkin color. It was held in one of those industrial chic tech hubs in East Austin that smelled like overachievers and burnt espresso. I wore black slacks, a blazer, and the pearl earrings my mom left me. They were my armor, quiet, solid, and from someone who knew what it meant to go uncredited. By 5 p.m., I was pacing between rented cocktail tables, checking catering trays, queuing up the presentation screens, and fielding last-minute texts from sponsors who couldn't find parking. Alden arrived 20 minutes late. He walked in like the hero at a movie's climax, rolled-up sleeves, undone collar, confidence oozing from every step. He barely glanced at me. Instead, he beelined to the AV booth, gave a few hearty backslaps to our junior developers, and accepted a flute of champagne that wasn't on the menu. I handed him the cue cards, which I'd printed on high-gloss stock, just the way he liked. He grinned without making eye contact and mumbled, "Perfect, thanks." As I turned to adjust a microphone, I caught someone behind me whisper, "Is she the event planner?" I gave a half smile I didn't mean, took a deep breath, and stepped to the side just in time to see Seraphine enter. Perfectly timed. She wore red. Everyone else wore navy or gray, or some other variation of startup minimalism. But not her. She knew how to occupy space. She took her place beside Alden on the mini-stage like she belonged there. No introduction, no acknowledgement, just presence. When Alden started his speech, he beamed with pride. "Tonight's possible because of the smartest minds I know." He gestured to Seraphine. "She gets it. She sees where we're going." He never looked at me. I stood in the back near the fire exit, sipping a warm bottle of sparkling water, watching as the applause rose. And for the first time, I felt not forgotten, but invisible by design. A week later, I was sitting cross-legged on the couch, with my laptop perched on a pillow, when I saw the write-up. A local business blog had covered the event. The headline read, "Solo Force Behind ClearPath's Rise." A smiling photo of Alden, arms crossed in front of a screen that showed slides I had built from scratch. Not a mention of me, not even in the caption. I scrolled slowly, eyes catching on every sentence that twisted the truth just enough to hurt. Visionary founder? From garage to greatness. Trailblazer. I didn't disappear. I was never meant to be seen. That night, while finalizing receipts in our shared Google Drive, I noticed a thread of emails I hadn't been copied on. I clicked, and there it was. The subject line, IPO Prep, Clean Version. It was a back and forth between Alden and Seraphine. The contents were more than strategic, they were surgical. Seraphine wrote, "Let's keep Kim out of the legal frame. No need to complicate ownership visuals." Alden responded, "She's not critical to the narrative. No one outside remembers her role." There was no anger, no venom in their tone, just clinical efficiency. My stomach tightened, not from rage but clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a choice. I had become inconvenient to the story they were building. The person who knew too much, but wasn't pretty enough for panels or bold enough for podcasts. So this is what erasure looks like, word by word. The day after I found that email thread, Seraphine texted me out of the blue. Hey, Kim, let's catch up. Been too long. Lunch on me? I stared at the screen for a full minute, thumb hovering over the keyboard, then typed back, Sure. Same spot downtown? She responded instantly with a heart emoji. That figured. 2 days later, we met at a quiet little bistro near Congress, the kind with reclaimed wood tables, over-salted kale chips, and cold brew on tap. She walked in dressed like a feature in a tech blog, casual but intentional. Oversized sunglasses, soft waves in her hair, a tote bag slung over one arm like it didn't weigh a thing. Kimberly, she sang, arms open wide. We hugged like acquaintances at a reunion, all performance and no substance. I sat across from her, letting her talk first. That was always the trick with people like her. They revealed more when they believed you weren't watching. She asked about my health, about yoga, about whether I'd seen the new mental health app Alden was pitching to VCs. I nodded along. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. Halfway through her matcha latte, she leaned in, her voice lowered. Kim, are you doing okay emotionally? I blinked. Excuse me? She smiled the way someone does before slipping a knife under your ribs. Well, I've just noticed you've been distant. You don't come to meetings anymore. You seem off. We're worried. I knew what that meant. Alden. Maybe a couple of board members. Maybe just her playing ventriloquist again. I didn't flinch. I've been focused on operations, like always. She cocked her head, faux sympathy dripping off her tone. Of course, but operations can't thrive if the operator isn't stable. The rest of lunch passed in a blur of noise and forced smiles. When we said goodbye, I watched her walk away, hips swinging like she was on a catwalk. I sat in my car for a long time before driving off. That night, I pulled the old folders from my closet. Hard drives, thumb drives, legal binders. Years of work. I clicked through old company records, saved contracts, buried emails. It was after midnight when I found it. A PDF labeled Internal Review Memo Not Final. The preview alone made my chest tighten. Concerns have been raised regarding Kimberly Keene's emotional reliability. I opened it and read every line. Mood instability during team presentations. Attachment to legacy practices that no longer align with company vision. Resistance to change due to personal investment in outdated frameworks. Author, Seraphine Vale. CC'd, Alden Rhodes. I didn't cry. I didn't even get angry. I felt cold, measured. They weren't just sidelining me. They were building a legal case for my disappearance. A narrative of fragility, of volatility, so if I ever objected or fought back, they could say, look, we warned you, she's not well, and people would believe it. Because Seraphine had charm, because Alden had a reputation, and because I'd been quiet too long. They weren't just ignoring me. They were preparing to replace me, on paper and in people's minds. The next morning, I parked outside that same cafe again. Not to eat, just to think. I scrolled through my photos, stopping on one from college. Me and Seraphine, arms around each other in dorm t-shirts, smiling like idiots. She didn't stab me in the back. She held my hand the whole time and squeezed the blade deeper. I deleted the photo, not out of spite, out of clarity. That was the first time I let go of something that didn't deserve a place in the next version of my life. I left the cafe feeling like I'd been sleepwalking through a trap I helped design. The sun was sharp, the breeze too soft to cut through the heaviness in my chest. At home, the quiet waited for me like a patient enemy. When I opened the front door, there was a padded envelope leaning against it. No return label, no handwriting, just blank, sterile anonymity. I brought it inside like it was a box of glass. Inside, a thick contract, legal boilerplate wrapped in expensive bond paper. My name printed in bold on every page. And at the top, settlement and non-disclosure agreement. I scanned the first section. If signed, I would receive a one-time payment of $125,000 in exchange for relinquishing any present or future claim to ClearPath's intellectual property. withdrawing any acknowledgement of contribution to the company's founding or operational framework, agreeing not to speak publicly about my involvement. Ever. There was a yellow sticky note on the last page, crooked and handwritten. Just 5 words. Let's end this gracefully. S. Graceful. I read through it twice, then a third time, each pass tightening something in my chest. I wasn't furious. Not yet. I was stunned. They'd calculated the cost of my silence, labeled it, priced it, wrapped it in polite words, and couriered it to my doorstep like a thank you card for playing the background. I stared at the sticky note. Seraphine always did know how to put a bow on a dagger. The next evening, I met Alexis at a small Italian place we'd gone to since college. She was the only person outside of the company who'd seen me before the titles, before the startup dinners and brand colors, and the carefully curated lives we pretended were spontaneous. She arrived late, waved off the waiter like she owned the place, and sat across from me with a glass of Pinot already in hand. "You look tired," she said, more observation than concern. I passed her the envelope. She read in silence, lips pursed. Her thumb hovered over the signature line like it burned her. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm. "Kim, maybe it's not a loss. Maybe it's closure." I laughed without meaning to. "Closure? They sent a check and a warning label." She didn't blink. "I think they gave it to shut you up." Her tone was gentle, but her words landed with a thud. She kept going, like people do when they're scared for you, or maybe scared of becoming you. "Look, I'm not saying they're right, but what are you going to get out of fighting this? A public mess? Legal bills? Headlines that make you look like a bitter ex? Walk away while you still have dignity?" I looked down at my wine. It tasted metallic, like it had turned in the bottle. Sometimes dignity looks a lot like surrender. We didn't say much after that. Back home, I lit a candle, but didn't light the paper. I sat at my desk, the contract spread out like a map to somewhere I didn't want to go. I read every line again, this time slowly. Clause 9.4. The signatory agrees to refrain from asserting public claim of origin, creative input, or foundational involvement in the development of the product known as ClearPath. I picked up a red pen, drew a single line across that clause, and in the margin, I wrote 4 words. I remember everything. I folded the contract neatly, placed it under the candle holder, and sat in the dark staring at it. The flame flickered, patient and silent, waiting for permission to consume. They wanted me quiet, but I've always known. Silence can be the loudest kind of evidence. Morning crept in without permission. I sat at my desk long after the candle had burned itself out, its wax curled at the base like a silent witness. The contract was still there, unsigned, unburned, undeniable. By 10, I was parked in front of Sandra's office. She didn't ask questions when I called, just told me to come in. That was her way. Direct, no fluff. Sandra was already waiting with a file open on her desk. She wore a sharp navy blazer and had that look lawyers get when they've seen something they can't quite believe, but also can't ignore. "I went over the NDA," she said, skipping any small talk. "I also pulled the corporate registry and offshore filings." I leaned in. "You're listed nowhere," she said. "Not as founder, not as executive, not even as an early contributor." "That can't be," I said. "I signed the seed funding. Everything started from my name." She tapped the keyboard and turned the screen toward me. 2 LLCs registered in Nevada, 1 offshore in the Cayman Islands, all tied to ClearPath's core intellectual property, licensing, data protocols, even the branding package. One of them, ironically, was named Visionary Holdings, and not one included me. I sat still, letting the screen blur a little. "What exactly is this?" Sandra didn't soften her tone. "It's theft, Kimberly, wrapped in smart structuring and made to look like efficiency." Then she clicked another tab. A scanned signature. "This document," she said, "was submitted as your approval for IP transfer. You recognize that?" I leaned forward. The handwriting looked familiar, frighteningly so. My name, my loops, my spacing. But it wasn't mine. My signature had always curled the K inward. This one flicked up and out, just a touch. But enough. They forged me, Sandra nodded. Or someone traced you close enough that they thought they'd get away with it. The next hour passed in sharp, clipped questions. She started flagging potential lawsuits, SEC implications, whistleblower protections. I nodded along, though my mind was already somewhere else, somewhere smaller, colder, like the inside of a locked cabinet. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. I felt something worse. Confirmation. They hadn't just pushed me out of the story. They'd rewritten it completely. I left Sandra's office with copies of everything, the folder heavy in my arms. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I headed west. I needed space, and the hill country always gave it to me. Somewhere between Driftwood and Wimberley, I pulled off at a rest stop, parked under the shade of an oak, and sat there with the windows cracked. In the glove box, under old registration slips and faded receipts, was something I hadn't touched in years. A sealed envelope from my mother. She had written it months before she passed, but I hadn't been ready to read it then. I was afraid of what it might say. Or worse, what it wouldn't. I tore the seal slowly. Her handwriting was steady, the kind you only see on thank you cards and sympathy notes. I could hear her voice with every word. If you ever feel like everyone else owns the story, remember, you still have the pen. That line hit harder than anything Alden or Seraphine had ever said. I folded the letter back into its envelope, gently, like it deserved reverence. The wind picked up a little outside, rustling dry grass and stirring the dust off my tires. I looked out at the long stretch of road ahead and whispered, "Not anymore." This chapter's mine, the crown that wasn't mine. By the time I drove back into the city, the sky was overcast with the kind of gray that felt deliberate, like the world had conspired to dull the colors around me. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat still long enough for my seatbelt alarm to chime twice before I moved. The letter from my mother was folded neatly in my glove box now, tucked beside registration papers and a half-used parking pass from a holiday party Alden never thanked me for. That night, I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, not thinking, not planning, just listening to the steady creak of the ceiling fan. And then came the email. Subject line, Texas Innovation Summit, RSVP for Mr. Rhodes, plus guest. The assistant had CC'd me like I was some afterthought. Just confirming your attendance as Mr. Rhodes' partner. I nearly deleted it, but something made me reply. Confirmed. Saturday came quickly. The hotel was downtown, wrapped in banners and tech logos like a modern-day coliseum. People in polished shoes and expensive watches checked in with printed QR codes and fake smiles. At the table, the young man scanning badges asked without looking up, "Name? Kimberly Keene?" He paused, scrolled, then said, "You're listed under the spouse section." My smile didn't reach my eyes. Of course I am. He handed me a plastic badge, bold gray letters. Partner, domestic. I stepped into the ballroom and felt like I'd walked into a curated illusion. Spotlights, high-top tables with floral centerpieces, screens looping product animations and investor reels. Across the room, I saw Alden, already surrounded by VCs and reporters. He looked completely at home, like none of this had ever belonged to anyone but him. The section I was guided to sat far from the stage, near a bar where two women compared recipes for lemon cake and debated whether their Pilates instructor was really certified. "I used to build pitch decks," I murmured under my breath. "Now I'm expected to swap crockpot ideas." I sipped my champagne, warm, cheap, and turned my attention to the stage. The MC stepped up, all polished hair and cue card confidence. Tonight, we celebrate innovation, leadership, and the visionaries shaping tomorrow. And then it came. This year's rising tech icon, Seraphine Vale. The applause was thunderous. I didn't clap. Alden kissed her cheek before she climbed the stage. Flashbulbs went off like fireworks. Seraphine took the mic. I'm here because great teams and great vision empower women like me. Behind her, the giant LED screen flashed images, mock-ups, interface designs, strategy roadmaps. I knew them all. I'd made half of them. My work stood behind her, silent and obedient. I clenched my glass so tight I thought it might snap. But I didn't cry, didn't flinch. I stood up, walked out slowly. No one followed. The hallway outside was dim and quiet, a mercy. I sat on a bench by a vending machine, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound keeping me company. My phone buzzed. A text from Alden. Hope you enjoyed the show. Sorry they seated you wrong. I stared at it for a beat, then typed back. You did everything exactly right, if your goal was to crown the wrong queen. I set my phone down, watched the screen fade to black. By Monday, I had an email drafted. No rage, no regret. Just 3 attachments labeled, Phase 1. Monday morning didn't come with thunder or revelation. It came with coffee, black, quiet, steady. I sat at my kitchen counter, robe still cinched tight, laptop open, cursor blinking like a dare. My finger hovered for a moment, then clicked send. Subject: Ownership clarification, legal action pending. To Sandra, CC, ClearPath Board of Directors, SEC Investigations, Division Attachments, Seed Investment Agreement, notarized. Email from Alden Rhodes. Subject: Founding Day Details. Original pitch deck. Author: Attribution Metadata. No rage, no regret, just facts, lined up like dominoes. And with that, I sipped my coffee. Not to celebrate, just to mark the start of something irreversible. I didn't go back to bed. Instead, I paced. Folded laundry I didn't need to fold. Watered the plant on the windowsill that was already dying. My hands needed something to do while my name began rewiring someone else's narrative. By sunset, I was standing at my front door, lights off, curtains drawn halfway. I heard the gravel crunch before I saw the car pull up. Alden. He stepped out slowly, wearing that same charcoal coat he reserved for board meetings and second chances. He walked up the steps like he still belonged in my world. I opened the door just before he could knock. Kim, he said. That name had never sounded cheaper. You didn't have to do this. I held my stance. You're right. I could have gone louder. He shifted, smiled like a salesman trying to recover a lost deal. There's been a misunderstanding. We could work this out privately. No press, no public filings, just us. I stepped back inside for a second, returned with an envelope. This isn't private anymore, I said, handing it over. It's a demand letter with injunctive relief outlined on page 3. You'll also find a draft motion to suspend the IPO, pending forensic audit. He didn't take it. Not immediately. He stared at it like it might burn him. You're going to destroy everything we built, he said finally. No, I replied. You already did. I'm just taking back what's left. The silence between us lingered long enough to feel like a choice. Eventually, he took the envelope. I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. He walked back to his car slower than he'd arrived. At the curb, he turned slightly, like maybe he thought I'd say something, offer one last olive branch out of habit. But the door was already shut. I stood behind the curtain, still dry-eyed, and watched him hesitate. That door's been closing for years. Tonight, I heard it latch. 3 days passed without a word. I didn't go near the news, didn't check social media, didn't open my inbox. I just sat with the quiet, walked it around the block, folded it into my laundry, stirred it into my coffee. But when I finally stepped into Sandra's office on Thursday morning, her face said it all before she opened her mouth. They froze it, I blinked. The IPO? She nodded. This morning. Bloomberg picked it up before the market even opened. She turned her laptop toward me. There it was in all caps, black and white. ClearPath IPO, suspended pending legal review. The subheadline hit harder. Co-founder's legal filing raises ownership questions. I stared at the screen, not smiling, not moving. It's working, Sandra said softly. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. By noon, my name was trending. Not because I gave a statement, not because I hired a PR firm, but because people were digging. Forums lit up with timeline comparisons. Podcasts speculated on founding documents. One tech reporter tweeted, "Is Kimberly Keene the real builder behind ClearPath?" A few hours later, Seraphine issued a public statement. It was the kind of vague, hollow apology people craft in rooms filled with lawyers and handlers. We respect the contribution of all those who have touched the ClearPath journey and look forward to resolving these matters professionally. Alden didn't say a word. No camera footage, no tweets, no posts. I didn't speak either. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened LinkedIn and edited my bio. I added one sentence, built the foundation before they built the brand. I closed the app, logged out. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was restless, but because for the first time in years, the quiet wasn't suffocating. It was earned. Around 12:30, I opened my inbox. Over 100 unread emails. I scrolled past press requests, industry gossip, and board chatter until one subject line made me pause. "You probably don't remember me." I clicked. "Kimberly, I was your intern in 2018. You taught me how to write product briefs and how to ask better questions in meetings. You asked me how I was sleeping, not just how I was coding. No one had ever done that. I left ClearPath a year later and joined another startup. I've been watching from the sidelines lately, and I just wanted to say thank you. If there's anything I can do now, I owe you big." Ty, I read it twice, then again. I didn't cry, but I did close my eyes and breathe deeper than I had in weeks. Someone remembered, not because they had to, but because truth finds a way through even the thickest silence. The next evening, I climbed the stairs to the rooftop of my building. The city stretched out below, lit in patches like a quilt stitched in neon. I brought a printout of the IPO suspension article with me, not to frame, not to flaunt, just to hold. I sat there with the breeze in my hair, watching headlights crawl like fireflies along the freeway. I wasn't angry anymore. The headlines didn't clear my name. The silence of those who knew did. I pulled a notebook from my bag and wrote across the first page. Next steps. I didn't write anything else. Not yet. But I smiled, small, quiet, full. By the following Monday, Seraphine was trending, for all the wrong reasons. 2 weeks after the IPO freeze, I stepped into the glass-paneled boardroom on the top floor of ClearPath's downtown tower. The building hadn't changed, but I had. I wasn't there as a wife. I wasn't there as a former anything. I was there as a stakeholder, with paperwork to prove it and a lawyer at my side. Sandra entered just behind me, heels clicking in steady rhythm, a folder under one arm. On the other side of the table sat the usual suspects, Alden, Seraphine, and 6 board members I'd smiled at during launch parties, but who never remembered my name. I didn't waste time. "I'm here to clarify ownership," I said. "Not destroy your company, just clean house." Gideon Yates stepped through the door a second later. The same investor Alden had ghosted 3 years earlier, now standing beside me, like a reminder that karma had a memory longer than most people's patience. Sandra slid the first set of folders across the table. Financial misappropriation reports, forged signature comparisons, shell company documentation, she said, like she was reading a shopping list. Alden shifted in his seat. Seraphine kept her smile. It was too tight. "Let's not dramatize this," Alden started, hands raised. Sandra didn't flinch. "We're not. You are." Then came the audio. I pressed play on a recording pulled from a VC networking event. Seraphine's voice poured through the speakers. Confident, smug, undeniable. We knew she wouldn't fight back. She's a planner, not a threat. A rustle moved through the board. A few glances, some throat clearing. One member finally asked, Why didn't we know any of this? I looked up, steady. Because you listened to the loudest voice in the room, not the one doing the work. Seraphine opened her mouth, but I raised my hand before she could spin it. Save it. I spent 5 years being told to wait my turn. It's here. Alden, pale and still, tried again. I'll step down, he said. Effective immediately. Sandra leaned forward. The vote's already scheduled. The board didn't hesitate. 10 minutes later, a unanimous decision. Effective today, Alden Rhodes is no longer affiliated with ClearPath in any capacity. A press release was prepared on the spot. Seraphine remained seated, arms crossed tightly, like she could hold herself together with posture alone. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice or ask for thanks. I walked to the window, watched the traffic pulse below like blood through veins, and took a breath. This wasn't vengeance. This was oxygen. He built an empire on shadows. I just flipped the lights. The kingdom fell. But I still had to rebuild myself from the bricks they thought I left behind. 3 days passed without a boardroom, a camera flash, or anyone asking for my side. Not even Sandra pushed. She knew what it meant when someone chooses quiet after a storm. It's not retreat, it's restoration. Still, my phone never stopped buzzing. Voicemails stacked up. Interview requests from NPR, Fast Company, even CNN. Producers used words like redemptive arc, courageous voice, tech's unsung heroine. Sandra called once to check in. You want to go exclusive? She asked. We can control the narrative. I looked out the window, past the half-dead herb garden I hadn't touched since spring. No, I said. Let the noise chase them. I'm done auditioning for credit. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed a single post. Some truths are louder in silence. I'll let the record speak. It hit 500,000 likes in 2 hours. That evening, I was slicing an apple in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. I didn't expect anyone. I certainly didn't expect Isolde. She walked in without waiting, a bottle of red under her arm, and a look on her face that wasn't apology, but something close. No glass in hand? She said, holding the wine up like it was her permission slip. I figured you'd bring your own, I replied. We sat at the kitchen table like we had 100 times before we became different people. She poured. We clinked glasses, out of habit, not ceremony. She cleared her throat. I didn't think you had this in you. I didn't blink. That was your mistake. She nodded, looked down at her glass, then back up. I didn't mean it as an insult. I know, I said, but you did mean it. There was a long pause. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask her to. I just thought, he was the one with the vision. You were the structure. I didn't know structure could burn it all down. I smiled, small and flat. Structure holds the matches too. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat, sipping in the shared silence of two sisters who knew they'd never be close, but had finally stopped pretending they were enemies. Later that night, I climbed to the rooftop of my apartment building again. The city blinked below, unaware that anything had changed. I scrolled through a few of the messages I'd been ignoring, DMs from women, from interns, from strangers. You made me feel seen. I walked away from a toxic team today because of you. I didn't know quiet could be this powerful. I let the words settle. I let them land. Then I opened my voicemail. There was one left, unsaved, unplayed. Alden. I didn't need to listen to know what it said. The rhythm of his regret had been rehearsed in my head for years. I deleted it with one tap. Some rooms you don't need to re-enter. Closure isn't always a door. It's the decision to walk past it. The world now knew what I wasn't, but I was just beginning to decide who I would be next. 6 months later, I walked across the tiled lobby of the University of Texas Business School with a minimalist tote over one shoulder and zero desire to impress anyone. I didn't bring slides, no entourage, just my voice. The auditorium wasn't packed. A few rows of students, mostly early 20s, some curious, others clearly just here for the class credit. A handful of faculty sat in the back, whispering the way professors do when they're pretending not to be impressed. As I approached the podium, a few students looked up from their phones. One of them nudged the girl next to him and whispered, "That's her." But no one rushed me. No one clapped. I didn't need them to. I took a sip of water, adjusted the mic, and looked straight ahead. "I'm not here to talk about betrayal," I began. "I'm here to talk about boundaries." The room went still. "It's easy to build something when you're fueled by love," I said. "That part comes naturally. You give everything because you believe in it. You don't stop to ask who's writing the credits. You just build." I walked slowly across the stage. No slides behind me, just my words. But keeping your name on what you built when it grows, that's where the real work begins. That takes foresight. It takes clarity. And most of all, it takes self-respect. They were listening now. I spent years doing the invisible work, the unpaid, untagged, unthanked kind. I thought that if I stayed silent, people would notice more. Turns out, silence isn't a signal. It's a script. And if you don't speak, someone else will fill your lines for you. I paused, let that settle. I deleted a voicemail once, never played it. Not because I was afraid of what it said, but because I was afraid I'd believe it mattered. That got a few heads tilting. I'm not a cautionary tale. I'm not a headline. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just a woman who finally realized that the story I helped build was never mine, unless I claimed it. The room didn't erupt. There were no standing ovations. Just a silence I recognized. The kind that means people heard more than they expected to. After the talk, I stepped into the lobby to catch my breath. That's when she approached, a student, maybe 21, hair pulled back in a low bun, eyes wide but steady. She handed me a folded note. "I'm the silent one in my startup team," she said. "Thank you for making space for people like us." I touched her shoulder gently. "You don't need a microphone to be heard. You just need receipts." She smiled, walked away. Outside, the sky was leaning into dusk. The world didn't look different, but I did. Back at my workspace, a small, cozy studio off South Congress, I pinned the student's note next to my mother's letter. I didn't read either. I didn't need to. Then I opened a blank document. Not for a lawsuit, not for a press release, just a new page. And just like that, I wasn't the story they buried. I was the story I chose to tell.
Hello, my name's Marjorie. 10 years ago, my husband walked out on me and our 5 kids, no warning, no goodbye, just a note on the counter. Since then, I've built something from ashes scrubbing floors, selling my wedding ring, baking at midnight to feed my family. But just when we started healing, he came back smiling, asking to see the kids and hiding something worse. What kind of man disappears, then returns to rewrite the story? And what kind of mother does the world expect me to be when forgiveness feels like betrayal? I woke up to silence, a kind that didn't feel peaceful, just wrong. The side of the bed where Carlton usually slept was cold, untouched. I figured maybe he had gone out early, but something tugged at me. The air was too still. I walked into the kitchen, still in my robe, rubbing sleep from my eyes, and then I saw it. A single piece of paper folded neatly, resting next to the coffee pot. 7 words. That's all it took to break a 10-year marriage. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. No explanation, no fight the night before, no slammed door, just a note and 5 sleeping children in the next room. My body reacted before my mind did. I clutched the counter to keep from falling. My knees buckled, but I didn't let them hit the floor. I had 5 pairs of eyes who'd be waking up any minute, and I wasn't going to be the reason their world shattered before breakfast. Dorian was the first to notice something was off. He was only 11 but sharp as a blade. "Mom, where's Dad?" he asked, cereal spoon midair. I lied without blinking. He had to take a trip, work stuff. My voice was steady, too steady. He stared but didn't press. That was his gift and his curse. He held things in, just like me. I told them their dad was busy, that he'd call soon. I smiled so much that week my cheeks hurt. Inside I was spinning. I called his job, they said he'd quit 2 days ago. I tried his mother, she hadn't heard from him since last Christmas. I even called the hospital, hoping for anything. Dead, alive, missing, something. But no one had seen him. The police officer who took the report was kind, but shrugged. If he left willingly, it's not a crime, he said. Like abandoning 5 kids wasn't a damn crime. Bills stacked up. I added hours at the diner. Sleep became optional. Every time one of the kids asked, "When's Daddy coming back?" I gave the same answer. Soon. And I hated myself a little more each time. 2 weeks later, I went to apply for emergency aid. I waited 3 hours in a freezing office, only to be told I didn't qualify. "You're still legally married," the caseworker said without looking up. "Your husband needs to be present." "He's not present," I snapped. "That's the whole damn point." She just shrugged. "We can't process until we have proof of abandonment. How do you prove someone vanished when they did it quietly?" She didn't answer. That night, I found one of Carlton's old shirts stuffed in the laundry basket. I sat on the bathroom floor holding it like it was him, like I could still smell him on the collar. But the scent was gone, just like he was. I tucked the kids in one by one. Dorian pretended to be asleep, but I saw the wet patch on his pillow. I didn't say anything. That was the night I stopped hoping. I didn't know it then, but something inside me had started to shift, not break. Harden. The mornings after that felt mechanical. I wasn't waking up, I was rebooting. Alarm, kids, lunches, teeth brushed, socks matched most of the time. I wasn't even tasting my coffee anymore. It just kept my hands warm. I moved through the routine like muscle memory. Smiles on autopilot, voice steady, nothing real underneath. I'd park outside the diner before my shift and just sit there, forehead resting against the steering wheel. "Just get through today," I'd whisper. That became my mantra. Not things will get better. Just survive the next 12 hours. Sunday came, and I thought church might help. Familiar songs, familiar people, something grounding. I dressed the kids like we were still a whole family. I even curled Briseis' hair and found matching shoes for Nova. I pasted on a smile that felt too wide and too still. We sat in the same pew we always had. A few glances came our way, but nobody said anything. After service, I waited until the crowd thinned out and approached the board in the side room. Pastor Lyle looked surprised. "Sister Marjorie, everything all right?" I gave the polite version. "My husband's left. It's been a few weeks. I was hoping the church might be able to help, at least with groceries." Or my voice trailed off under his cautious eyes. Sister Gwen cleared her throat. "It's complicated, isn't it? We haven't heard from Carlton. And you two are still legally married, yes?" My cheeks burned. What does that have to do with feeding my kids? "It's not that we don't want to help," she said, voice soft like fake velvet. "But we're called to protect families, not encourage division. So because he disappeared and didn't bother to sign a piece of paper, I don't qualify as struggling?" No one answered. Gwen just reached for a clipboard and busied herself. I left with nothing but the sting of shame behind my eyes. Back home, I didn't cry. I grabbed a bucket and started scrubbing the bathroom floor like it insulted me. Bleach burned my nose. My fingers cracked. I didn't stop. Carlton used to make pancakes on Sundays, humming off-key, flipping them while I curled the girls' hair. That version of life felt fictional now, a lie with good lighting. Later, I shut the bathroom door, sat on the cold tile, and let my forehead rest against my knees. No sobs, just heat behind my eyes that wouldn't fall. That night, I walked past the hallway shelf and saw the church's framed photo, Carlton, the kids, matching outfits. I took it down. "If God only helps those who help themselves," I muttered, "then I guess it's time I start." I pulled out a notebook from the drawer and flipped past the used pages. The back was still blank, clean, untouched, like something could still be written. I titled it in bold, Plan A. The first laugh after Carlton left came during dinner, over a spilled cup of juice. Dorian made some joke about Kellen eating like a velociraptor, and all 5 of them cracked up. Even me, just for a second. Then the guilt hit me hard, because for a moment we felt okay, and that terrified me. The house was quieter now, not empty, just rebalanced. We found new routines. Dorian set the table without being asked. Ansel walked Briseis to her bus stop. Some mornings I thought maybe, just maybe, we were learning to float without him. Then the knock came. It was a Tuesday. Sunlight spilled into the hallway as I opened the door. 2 officers stood there, one flipping through a small notepad. Marjorie Evers? I nodded, heart dropping. We're following up on an unpaid account, one said. Loan in the name of Carlton Evers. This address is listed as the billing location. I blinked. He hasn't lived here in months. They glanced at the kids clustered behind me. Is he reachable? No. I don't even know what state he's in. A pause. Then, flatly, well, ma'am, this is a civil suit. Just doing our part. I noticed Mrs. Clary next door pulling back her curtain, eyes sharp and unblinking. The pit in my stomach grew heavier. I'm not paying for something I didn't even know existed, I said. But my voice cracked halfway through. They handed me a sealed envelope, nodded, and left. Dorian quietly closed the door behind them. The silence afterward was louder than the knock. Later, I found Ansel crouched behind the couch. Are they coming back? Not if I can help it, I said, though I didn't believe myself. That night, I stood at the kitchen counter trying to call the loan company. The woman on the phone asked for proof of separation, then a signature from Carlton to release liability. I don't have his signature, I snapped. Then we can't remove you from the account, Mom. I laughed. It wasn't funny, but it came out bitter and sharp. Of course not, I muttered, hanging up. I remembered Carlton telling me once, let me handle the bills, babe, it's just easier that way. I'd trusted him. Stupid me. Hours later, I walked past the corkboard near the hallway. Wedding photos, school schedules, sticky notes with grocery lists. It all looked like someone else's life. I reached for the pushpins and tore everything down. The wedding photo came last. My fingers shook. If he wanted to disappear, then he didn't get to leave pieces of himself behind like scars. I lit a match, dropped it onto the photo in the sink, and watched his smile curl into black. I aired out the kitchen the next morning, trying to clear the smell of burnt paper. The smoke had gone, but something sour lingered. I opened the windows, wiped down the sink, and went about the routine. Lunches, backpacks, faces kissed on the forehead. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was heavier than usual. Dorian had become my shadow, always watching, always ready to help. But Ansel, he grew quieter. His sketchbooks stopped appearing on the coffee table. He wasn't humming to himself anymore. He barely spoke during dinner. I told myself it was just the season changing. A phase. Kids go through them. But then came the school call. Ansel missed first period and wasn't marked present all day, the voice on the line said. Everything okay at home? I paused. Define okay. When he walked through the door later, I didn't wait. You skipped school? I held up the automated letter from the district. And this math grade? What is going on with you, Ansel? He slammed his backpack down. What's going on? Dad left. That's what? My breath caught. At least he had the guts to walk out, he shouted, instead of pretending like this is still a family. The door to his room shook as he slammed it shut. That night, he didn't come home. Dorian and I drove street by street until the sky turned orange. We asked neighbors, called classmates. I dialed the police. A report was filed. Descriptions given. But every officer's face looked the same tired sympathy with no promises. I sat on the laundry room floor and stared at the dryer spinning like it had answers. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my teeth. I'm losing them, I whispered, one by one. Flashbacks played without asking. Carlton holding Ansel as a newborn, rocking him in the same armchair that now held a laundry basket. He looks just like me, Carlton had once said, proud and oblivious. When Ansel came back the next morning, he looked older. Or maybe I was seeing clearer. He handed me a crumpled note. Just wanted to see if anyone would come looking. I didn't yell. I just pulled him into me. He sobbed into my neck. I didn't know what else to do, he said. I know, I whispered, but don't ever disappear like that again. That night I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring, back eyes bloodshot, jaw set like stone. If I didn't start fighting harder, this house wouldn't survive me either. By the end of that week, I had reorganized the entire hallway closet, cleaned the baseboards with a toothbrush, and alphabetized the spice rack. Grief had made me restless, but that night, as I sat at the kitchen table in silence, something new stirred beneath the exhaustion. Purpose. I opened my notebook, the one I had labeled Plan A. Page after page filled with crossed-out figures, messy sketches, late-night ideas scrawled between bites of reheated leftovers. I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was plotting. "Is this real?" Dorian asked as he peeked over my shoulder. I was drawing a logo, a whisk, crossed with a wooden spoon, with Marjorie's maid underneath. I nodded, though my fingers trembled slightly. The next morning, I sat in a glass office across from a loan officer, who smiled like he'd already made up his mind. I handed him the proposal, the numbers, the goals. He skimmed, nodded, then paused. "You're listed as married, but there's no cosigner? My husband's gone. I'm doing this alone. Legally, you're not single. Without a spouse's signature or collateral, we can't approve." I pressed my lips together. He didn't look up again, just pushed the papers back toward me. "I'm sorry." I walked out with my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. I sat in the car for a full 10 minutes before I opened the glove box. Carlton's wedding band gleamed back at me. Mine was tucked inside it, both still in that same velvet box we'd been handed at the altar. Flashback hit me hard, Carlton sliding the ring onto my finger, whispering, "We got this, babe." But he didn't. I did. I drove straight to the pawn shop off Livingston. The clerk didn't even ask why. He just said, 300, that's the best I can do. I'll take it. That same night I met a woman in a Target parking lot, Craigslist. She handed over a used but sturdy countertop oven for $250. We exchanged a nod to tired women in hoodies, making ends meet without explanation. Back home, I scrubbed the kitchen counters, preheated the oven, and started with something simple, blueberry muffins. The first tray burned. The second came out lopsided, but the third fluffy, golden, and warm tasted like something that wasn't defeat. Nova wandered in, still in her pajamas. She took a bite, eyes wide. "Mommy, this is better than birthday cake." I smiled for the first time that whole week. Then I flipped to a clean page in my notebook and wrote, Week 1, goal $50 in orders. The next morning, I boxed up the cooled muffins and started frosting a batch of red velvet cupcakes. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and melted butter. I was piping swirls of cream cheese when I heard it, the knock. Not a polite tap. A firm, deliberate knock. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the front door. There he was, Carlton, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. He wore the same kind of smile he used to flash when he forgot a birthday and tried to charm his way out of it. "Hey, Marjorie," he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" My pulse slowed, but my fingers curled tight around the doorknob. "You've had 10 years to talk," I replied. "Now's not a great time. I miss them. I want to see the kids. One visit." I stared at him, searching for something real in his face. But it was like looking through a window into a burned-out house. Nothing left. "You don't get to want," I said. "You forfeited that when you left." I didn't wait for a response. I shut the door, firm but controlled. The cupcakes didn't even lose their shape. That night, while clearing dishes, I noticed Dorian hadn't touched his food. He was scrolling his phone with a distant look. "What's going on?" I asked. He hesitated. "Dad, he messaged me. Last week." I froze mid-step. "What?" "He said he's been thinking about us. About me." I leaned against the counter, breath tight. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because part of me wanted to believe him," Dorian admitted. "And part of me didn't want to upset you." My voice came out quieter than I expected. He's still breaking this family, just with a softer knife now. Later that night, I texted him. "You do not contact them again unless it goes through me." He responded fast. "You can't control everything." My fingers didn't shake as I typed back, "Try me." The next morning, I drove to the hardware store, picked up a lockbox, and drilled it onto the mailbox post myself. Mail, texts, memories, he wouldn't slip through the cracks anymore. She screwed the lockbox shut and muttered to herself, "No more surprises." That afternoon, I was scraping batter out of a mixing bowl when Dorian came into the kitchen with his laptop clutched tight to his chest. "Mom," he said, voice tense, "you need to see this." He set the laptop on the table, screen already loaded. A GoFundMe page, bright and bold, stared back at me. Carlton's face smiling like a wounded hero sat right under the headline, "Starting over after family hardship." My throat tightened. The page went on about how he was a loving father of 5 trying to rebuild after unexpected loss and hardship. He even mentioned me, his ex-wife, who's been through so much, like we were still in the same sentence. "Is this real?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "He posted it last week," Dorian said. "It's getting shares. Donations, too." I scrolled down. My name, our city, our kids' blurred photos lifted from old Facebook posts, then the comments. She must have pushed him away. Men like him deserve another chance. I sent $25. Hope he gets his family back. I slammed the laptop shut, chest burning. "He's fundraising off of our pain," I hissed. "Hez selling a lie." The kids were in the next room, but I knew they heard. Briseis peeked in, face pale. "Are people going to come here?" Ansel stepped beside her. "This is harassment." I sat at the table, hands curled into fists. Legal options flickered in my mind. Defamation, privacy violations. But I also saw the headlines. Estranged wife sues broke father. Dorian leaned forward. "If he's not going to stop, maybe we don't either." That night, I called Carlton. "You take it down, or I swear I will end this in ways you can't predict." He chuckled like we were still playing house. "You always did bark loud, Marjorie, but you never bit." I gritted my teeth. "Try me again. You've confused survival with weakness." He didn't hang up. I did. Then I reached for my phone and tapped a name I hadn't used in years, my old divorce attorney. She didn't wait for his reply. She'd already started dialing her lawyer. I didn't sleep much after that call. Morning light poured in like nothing had changed, but everything had. Over breakfast, the kids were unusually quiet. Dorian caught my glance and gave the slightest nod. It was time. After dinner, I asked them all to stay at the table. I walked to my bedroom and came back with a folder. I set it down in the center thick with screenshots, text transcripts, and a copy of the letter my lawyer helped draft. I didn't speak for a moment. Just let them see it. "That's what he's been doing," I said. "Lying. Publicly. To strangers for money. I've spoken with an attorney. We can act. But before anything else happens, you deserve to know everything." Briseis reached for the pages first, eyes darting across the screen captures. Nova leaned into my side. Kellen picked at a thread on the placemat. Dorian broke the silence. He never asked how we're doing, just what we can give. Briseis looked up. "He doesn't even know my favorite color." Ansel's voice came steady. "We're not his excuse for a second chance." I didn't cry, I was past that. But I felt something in my chest unclench. Later that night, after the house went quiet, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out paper. Not email, not a text, a letter, my handwriting. "You didn't just walk away," I wrote, "you disappeared. Now that we're standing again, you want to return to what exactly? A family you abandoned? Or the story of one?" I paused only once before sealing the envelope. I didn't write to be forgiven. I wrote to close the book. The next morning, I dropped it in the mailbox and locked it shut. By noon, an email came in. "I understand." I stared at those 2 words. For once, he didn't argue. That night, the kids set the table without being asked. Dorian cracked a joke about Nova's lopsided ponytails. Briseis offered to light the candle, and I let her. We gathered around the flame. I looked at each of them, whole, loud, imperfect mine. I lit the candle and whispered, "We begin again." The morning after the candlelit dinner felt different, not loud or triumphant, just quietly whole. No tension in the air, no waiting for the next shoe to drop. Nova danced around the kitchen with a towel over her shoulders like a cape. Kellen read from a cereal box like it was scripture. Briseis sat by the window, sketching. Dorian handed me a manila envelope. "Acceptance letter," he said. "Local state college. I start next semester." I hugged him hard enough to make him roll his eyes, but he didn't pull away. Later that week, a forwarded letter landed in the mailbox. It was postmarked from another state, hand-addressed in handwriting I hadn't seen in a decade. Carlton. "I didn't come back for the right reasons," it began. "I was broke, desperate. I told myself I missed you all, but I missed who I used to be when I was with you. That version of me didn't exist anymore." He said he'd moved into a shelter, that he was trying to stay clean, trying to be honest for the first time. "You don't owe me anything. Thank you for protecting them." I couldn't. I folded the letter, put it in a drawer. That was enough. A few days later, I stood in line at the county office, finalizing custody paperwork. No contest, full guardianship, sealed. Then I went to the bank, opened my business account, Marjorie Bell's Bakery, sole proprietor. No cosigner, no shared name, just mine. That evening, after dishes were done and backpack zipped, I slipped out to the backyard. The air had cooled. Wind rattled the fence. He left with a lie, I whispered. I lived in the truth. Memories flickered. The slammed door, the police lights, Ansel's empty bed, flour-dusted counters. And still we stood. We didn't just survive you, I said to no one. We outgrew you. Sunday came. Pancakes flipped on the griddle. The table buzzed with laughter. All 5 kids crowded around, spilling syrup and stories. I set down the last plate and looked at Themi family, rebuilt brick by brick. A new photo hung on the wall now. No Carlton, just us. Grinning, real. He missed watching them become whole. I didn't. Some stories don't end with forgiveness, they end with freedom. You know, if someone told me 10 years ago that I'd end up here not just surviving, but standing tall, I would have laughed through tears. Or maybe just cried harder. But here's what I've learned the hard way. Closure doesn't come when someone says sorry, it comes when you stop waiting for one. You don't have to carry someone else's guilt to prove you're strong. And sometimes, protecting your peace means closing a door and bolting it shut, even when it used to be called home. To every single mom out there, every father doing it alone, every child trying to make sense of why someone left, you are not broken, you are rebuilding. There's no timeline for healing, but there is a power in reclaiming your story. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved in order to love yourself more? Leave a comment and let me know type 1 if this story hit home for you, or tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if you didn't like it, that's okay too. Tell me why and where you're tuning in. I'm listening. If the story moved you, helped you breathe a little deeper, or reminded you that you're not alone, please subscribe to this channel. There's more to come, more stories, more truth, more strength. From one survivor to another. Thank you for watching.